The 2024-2025 season has concluded, with the Philadelphia Eagles being crowned as Super Bowl champions. But how did every team do this season? In this video, I'm going to be grading every NFL team based on how they did this season. While record will be a large factor, I'm also going to be considering preseason expectations and playoff success when I give these grades. That being said, if you enjoy this video, then please drop a like and subscribe if you're new. Subscribe takes just a second and it really helps me out. Thank you, and let's get started. Arizona Cardinals, C. The Cardinals had just about the most mediocre season possible. They actually started great, going 6-4 in their first 10 games, but lost 5 out of their next 7 to finish 8-9. They weren't expected to do much, as their preseason over-under projection was at 7.0, so at least they passed that. They finished with the 12th best offense and the 15th best defense, but they also finished 3rd in their division and missed the playoffs. It wasn't a bad season for the Cards, but it could have been better had they not collapsed at the end. Atlanta Falcons, C-. The Falcons gave Kirk Cousins a 4-year, $180 million contract before the season, and that was the move that was supposed to lead them into playoff contention. Before the season, they were expected to win 9 to 10 games, but that did not happen. Outside of a couple games, Kirk Cousins was absolutely awful, and the Falcons actually turned to Michael Penix Jr. in Week 16, and while he did play well, he only went 1-2. The Falcons finished the season 8-9, coming second in their division and missing the playoffs. They finished a full 2 games behind the Bucs despite sweeping them, and while their offense was bad, their defense was even worse. They finished second worst in sacks, with just 31 on the season, and they allowed 24.9 points per game. 8-9 isn't a horrible record by any means, but considering the expectations, this season was a disappointment. Baltimore Ravens, A-. The Ravens did what they do best, having a great regular season and then losing in the playoffs. They finished 12-5 and earned the 3 seed, then beat the Steelers in the wildcard round before losing to the Bills in the divisional round. They finished 3rd in offense and 9th in defense, which was good, and both Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson had incredible seasons. Overall, the Ravens did have a good year, but once again, they failed to have much playoff success. Buffalo Bills, A. Speaking of the team that beat the Ravens in the divisional round, the Bills had a slightly better season than the Ravens, so they get a slightly better grade. The Bills finished 13-4 and made it all the way to the AFC Championship game before once again losing to the Chiefs in the playoffs. Josh Allen had a spectacular season and won his first MVP, leading the Bills to the 2nd best offense in the league, and their defense was 11th. There's no denying it, this was a successful season, but you have to wonder if they'll ever get over the hump. Carolina Panthers, D+. The Panthers actually had some hype entering the season, as they brought in Dave Canales and spent a lot of money on talent for Bryce Young, who was entering his 2nd season after a nightmare rookie year. However, all that hype immediately went out the door, as the Panthers lost a combined 73-13 in their first 2 games, and Young was benched. Andy Dalton came in relief and didn't play much better. However, Young came back in Week 8, and from then on, he actually played pretty well. He went toe-to-toe with the Chiefs, Bucs, and Eagles. However, Young's improved play did not translate into wins. The Panthers finished just 5-12 and boasted the worst defense in the NFL. It's nice that Young looks like a competent quarterback again, but this was still a really bad season. Chicago Bears, D-. This might have been the most disappointing team of the season. The Bears drafted a generational prospect in Caleb Williams #1 overall and planted him into an incredible situation. He had 3 talented wide receivers, a solid offensive line, and a great defense. However, all 3 receivers had disappointing seasons, the offensive line was way worse than expected, and while he certainly wasn't bad, Caleb Williams didn't exactly play his best either. The worst part about this Bears team, however, was the coaching. Offensive coordinator Shane Waldron was horrible and got canned after Week 10, and Matt Eberflus had a whole lot of coaching decisions that were questionable, most notably the one in the Thanksgiving Lions game. The Bears also found a lot of stupid ways to lose, whether it was allowing a Hail Mary, getting a kick blocked, scoring 3 points in a primetime game, all of it was bad. The 2024 Chicago Bears were expected to at least compete for a playoff spot. Instead, they buried themselves in the dirt. Cincinnati Bengals, C. The Bengals were another team that had a disappointing season, though not quite to the same extent as the Bears. The Bengals were expected to win 10 to 11 games, and with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins, most were sure that the Bengals would make the playoffs. However, despite Joe Burrow having an MVP caliber season and Jamar Chase winning the Triple Crown, the Bengals still finished just 9-8 and missed the playoffs. This was mostly due to their defense, which allowed the 25th most points per game. The Bengals went just 3-4 in games where they scored over 30 points, showing you just how bad their defense really was. If it wasn't for that awful unit, the Bengals would have been in the playoffs, and with Burrow at the helm, who knows what would have happened. Instead, the Bengals disappointed yet again, and let's just all hope they turn things around and not waste Burrow's entire career. Cleveland Browns, F. This one is no shocker. Finishing 3-14 will grant you an F, no matter what expectations you had coming in. Massage enthusiast Deshaun Watson was under center for the first 7 weeks, and I would say he played quarterback, but I don't think I can even say that about him. He was atrocious, so atrocious that I made an entire video on it, which you should check out. Link in the description. Anyway, the Browns then rotated between Jameis Winston, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and Bailey Zappi, which obviously did not work. The rest of the team was ass as well. Amari Cooper was shipped out after just a few weeks. The offensive line was really bad, and the defense was ranked 27th in the league. The only competent player on the Browns, besides Myles Garrett, was Jerry Jeudy, who posted the best numbers of his career. Overall, this was a really bad season, but hopefully they can do something with the second overall pick. Dallas Cowboys, C-. The Cowboys signed Dak Prescott to a 4-year, $240 million contract before the season, hoping he could finally take this team over the hump. Unfortunately, he suffered a season-ending injury in Week 9, derailing the Cowboys season as they finished just 7-10 and 3rd in their division, far below their 10-win expectations. They had the second worst defense in the entire league, and their offense wasn't much better. Cooper Rush wasn't horrible as a replacement for Dak, but he certainly wasn't good. Injuries did affect the Cowboys season, but that doesn't take away from the fact that they were very disappointing. Denver Broncos, B+. The Broncos weren't expected to do anything this season, as they had just drafted Bo Nix 12th overall and had a roster that was pretty void of talent at most positions. However, due to Sean Payton's masterful coaching, Bo Nix's impressive rookie season, and multiple breakout stars on both offense and defense, the Broncos finished 10-7 and made the playoffs. They were only expected to win 5 to 6 games before the season, and they shattered that. Bo Nix led the Broncos to the 10th best offense in the league, and even more surprising, they finished with the 3rd best defense. Yeah, they got blown out in their wildcard game, but nobody expected them to even be there in the first place. This was an excellent season from the Broncos that has set them up for success in the next few years. Detroit Lions, A-. The Lions finished the regular season 15-2, tied with the Chiefs for the best record in the NFL, and earning the 1 seed. However, what prevents this from being any higher than an A- is the fact that they didn't win a single playoff game this season. They lost 45-31 to the Commanders in the divisional round. This team looked like a Super Bowl contender heading into the playoffs, but poor defense and 5 turnovers by the offense led to their downfall. Having a great regular season is nice, but it doesn't really matter if you have the same amount of playoff wins as the Raiders this season, especially when you're the 1 seed. Defensive injuries definitely weren't helpful, but they should have won at least 1 playoff game. Don't get me wrong, this was a really good season, but it ended way too soon. Green Bay Packers, B-. The Packers had the definition of an above-average season. They finished 11-6, 1 game ahead of their 10-win expectations, and they lost in the wildcard round to the eventual Super Bowl champion Eagles. They had a top 10 offense and defense with contributions from free agent acquisitions Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney. Matt LaFleur was one of the better coaches this season, managing to keep the Packers season afloat despite repeated injuries to Jordan Love. And in the end, they were just outmatched in the playoffs by a super team. Nothing really more to say. It was a good season. Houston Texans, B. The Texans had big expectations this season as they were coming off a 2023 campaign where they went 10-7 and won a playoff game. And despite some rough patches and injuries, this season was the exact same. They went 10-7, won their division, and won a playoff game. It's interesting that they had almost the exact same results as last season despite both their offense and defense taking a step back from last year. CJ Stroud wasn't the best quarterback in the world, but he was certainly better than he got credit for, especially considering the injuries that the offense was dealing with throughout the season. Had there not been as many injuries, I think the Texans could have gone even further, but they still had a pretty good season. Indianapolis Colts, C. The Colts were a complete wildcard entering the season, as their entire season basically relied on if Anthony Richardson could play well or not, and unfortunately, for the most part, he didn't, finishing with a sub-50 completion percentage and had 8 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. Their defense was also not good, finishing 24th in the league, their highlight moment being when they allowed 45 points in a must-win game to Drew Lock and the Giants. To be honest, it's a miracle they even finished 8-9. Their preseason win prediction was 8-9 wins, and they finished right there. So I would say overall, it was a fine season for the Colts. Jacksonville Jaguars, D-. Last season, the Jaguars had a horrible collapse that kept them out of the playoffs. In the offseason, they made a bunch of moves to try and fix their roster, bringing in notable names of free agency such as Eric Armstead, Gabe Davis, and Mitch Morse. They also drafted Brian Thomas Jr. 23rd overall. However, other than Brian Thomas, all of the Jaguars' notable offseason acquisitions disappointed. And on top of that, the players and staff already in the building also disappointed. Trevor Lawrence wasn't the problem by any means, but he certainly wasn't great. Doug Peterson had a whole host of issues that led him to getting fired way later than he should have, and multiple players, including Lawrence, got injured, all leading to a very disappointing 4-13 season, far from the 8-9 win expectations. Both the offense and the defense finished bottom 7, and they now sit with the 5th pick in the draft. The only reason that this isn't an F is because I simply can't put them on the same level as the Browns and the other teams that I'm giving it an F, because yes, there's more. Regardless, this was still a very, very bad season in Duval. Kansas City Chiefs, A+. Was the Super Bowl bad? Yes, it was, and there's no denying it. But they still made the Super Bowl. They were still one of the top 2 teams in the league. That warrants an A+. Not to mention they finished the regular season 15-2. Yes, they choked on the biggest stage, but even getting there is an incredible accomplishment. Like it or not, the Chiefs get an A+. Las Vegas Raiders, D. The Raiders were expected to be bad, and they were bad, finishing 4-13 and earning themselves the 6th pick in the draft. They cycled between Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell, and Desmond Ridder at the quarterback position, none of which worked out. Their defense was absolutely awful, and even Max Crosby wasn't as good as he normally is, though he was playing injured. The only bright spot on the entire Raiders roster was first-round rookie Brock Bowers, who had the best rookie tight end season of all time, and one of the best rookie seasons in general of all time, especially considering his quarterback play. However, Bowers wasn't enough to save this team from being terrible. Hopefully they used the 6th pick wisely. Los Angeles Chargers, B-. The Chargers completely retooled their staff in the offseason, bringing in Michigan coaches Jim Harbaugh and Jesse Minter to try and fix their team. And despite the lack of talent on offense outside of Justin Herbert, the Chargers managed to have a really solid season, finishing 11-6 before losing to the Texans in the wildcard round. It was a very similar season to the Packers. Now, their loss to the Texans was ugly, but I don't think too many people had them making the playoffs in the first place, let alone the 5 seed. Not the best ending, but an overall good season. Los Angeles Rams, B. This was the Rams' first season without Aaron Donald, and they still had a great season, finishing first in the NFC West with a 10-7 record and winning a playoff game. Both Jared Verse and Braden Fisk had great rookie seasons, especially Verse, who won Defensive Rookie of the Year. Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua dealt with injuries, but the Rams still managed to take advantage of a weak division. Their playoff win over the Vikings was a dominant performance, and they went toe-to-toe with the Super Bowl champion Eagles, only losing by 6 points. The Rams were never going to go to the Super Bowl. They weren't on the same level as the Lions or Eagles, but they still had a pretty good season nonetheless. Miami Dolphins, C. The Dolphins are another team that dealt with injuries, mainly to Tua, who missed 6 games. This caused the Dolphins to finish with the 22nd best offense in the league, and though they had a top 10 defense, it wasn't enough. They finished 8-9, missing out on the playoffs. They had a win projection of 10 and couldn't quite reach that, but it's not like they had a horrible season either. You can definitely do worse than 8-9. If Tua hadn't gotten injured, then the Dolphins would probably be in the playoffs, but unfortunately he did. Mediocre season for the Dolphins, so they get a mediocre grade. Minnesota Vikings, B+. The Vikings were probably the most surprising team this season. They lost Kirk Cousins in the offseason and brought in Sam Darnold to be the bridge quarterback, and they were projected to win just 6 to 7 games. Instead, the Vikings more than doubled that, managing to go 14-3 and make the playoffs. Sam Darnold had a complete career revival, and their defense finished top 5. Shockingly, they didn't win their division due to the Lions finishing 15-2. However, the reason that this grade isn't an A or even an A- is because of that wildcard game. They got destroyed by the Rams, and they looked like they didn't even belong there. Their offensive line, which had been a bit of a problem all season, completely gave way, allowing 9 sacks. Though Darnold didn't help much with that. The Vikings were never supposed to be in the playoffs in the first place, but without a playoff win, I can't give them anything higher than a B+. New England Patriots, D. The Patriots had the lowest preseason win expectation at just 4 to 5 wins, and they matched that perfectly, finishing 4-13, which nobody was surprised about. Jacoby Brissett started for the first few games and was horribly mid, so third overall rookie Drake May took over, and considering the situation around him, he actually played pretty well. He wasn't that good, but he could have been so much worse. The Patriots had basically no wide receivers. Jalen Polk was a complete bust, and all of their other receivers are either bad or really bad. May definitely showed flashes. The rest of the team didn't though, and that's how you end up with a 4-13 record and the 4th overall pick. It was expected, but the Patriots did have a bad season. New Orleans Saints, D. The Saints were supposed to be a mediocre team that, maybe, with a lot of luck, could sneak their way into a division title. For the first 2 weeks, they looked like the best team in the NFL. Then the rest of the season happened, and poof, 5-12 and last in the NFC South. Derek Carr got hurt midway through, so Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener traded starts, and both looked bad. Dennis Allen got fired after posting a 2-7 record, and Darren Rizzi didn't fare much better. Both the offense and defense were bottom half, and now here the Saints sit yet again with a mediocre draft pick and no foreseeable future. It's a miracle Kellen Moore even took this head coaching job. Anyway, bad season, bad grade. New York Giants, F. Well, this was shocking. A team with a quarterback room consisting of Daniel Jones, Tommy DeVito, and Drew Lock, along with an offense that has no talent outside of Malik Neighbors and 6 weeks of Andrew Thomas, finished as the second worst in the entire NFL. They, as a collective team, scored just 9 more points than Baker Mayfield did by himself. They also let Saquon Barkley go to the Eagles and win a Super Bowl while rushing for 2,000 yards. Yeah, there really isn't anything else to say. The Giants sucked. New York Jets, F. Oh look, both New Jersey teams got an F this season. I did say the Bears were the most disappointing team this season, but I think that title actually goes to the Jets. They were expected to win 9 to 10 games this season and won 5. Their offense, with Aaron Rodgers, Breece Hall, Devontae Adams, and Garrett Wilson, ranked 24th in the league. Their defense, which had been towards the top of the league the past few seasons, finished 20th. I guess that's what happens when you fire your defensive head coach after just 5 weeks. I also made a video about why firing Robert Saleh would be a huge mistake, and what do you know, I and many others were correct. The Jets were supposed to be Super Bowl contenders, or at the very least playoff contenders, but instead they flopped in the most Jets way possible. Maybe next time, don't trust your teenage sons to make decisions based off Madden ratings. Philadelphia Eagles, A++. If the Chiefs get an A+, then the Eagles get an A++. They won the Super Bowl. You quite literally can't get any better than that. It wasn't even close either. They thoroughly dominated the Chiefs. Saquon Barkley casually hopped from the Giants over to the Eagles and put up the best season ever, finishing with 2,857 scrimmage yards, including playoffs, which is the most ever. Barkley literally traveled 1.6 miles this season. Yeah, that's all I really got in the Eagles. They won the Super Bowl. If you win the Super Bowl, you get an A++. That's how it works. But Eagles fans, please try and refrain from destroying your city too much. Pittsburgh Steelers, B-. On to the other Pennsylvania team, and they didn't have quite as good a season as the Eagles did. The Steelers started the season with Justin Fields, and he went 4-2 as a starter before they turned to Russell Wilson, and at the start, he did even better. Over his first 7 games, Russ went 6-1, and the Steelers were sitting at 10-3. However, the Steelers then proceeded to lose their next 4 games, finishing 10-7, second in the division, and then, in typical Steelers fashion, they lost to the Ravens in the wildcard round. Russ stopped cooking after week 14, and the Steelers proved that they were not on the same level as the real contenders. This season was similar to the Packers and Chargers, as both those teams lost in the wildcard as well, so I give the Steelers the same grade. It wasn't a bad season, but it could have been better. San Francisco 49ers, C-. The 49ers are a tough one to grade because on one hand, they finished just 6-11 despite having 11-12 in expectations. On the other hand, injuries to multiple key players basically derailed their season. Had this been a fully healthy 49ers team that had done this, I would have given them a D+. But instead of giving them a little grace because of the injuries, which are out of their control, that doesn't mean they weren't disappointing though. Deebo Samuel had a huge fall off, and he was actually a liability at times. And Brock Purdy wasn't quite able to step up and elevate his team when the system began crumbling around him. Their defense was also really bad, finishing 29th in the league. Overall, this was a very disappointing season from the reigning NFC champs, but hopefully they can stay healthy and bounce back next season. Seattle Seahawks, C+. The Seahawks made the playoffs. I would have probably given them a B-, and I know they still finished with a 10-7 record, but they still weren't good enough to make the playoffs, unfortunately. They had some really unfortunate losses that frankly never should have happened, most notably a loss to the Giants. They also choked in an overtime loss to the Rams that, had they won, would have put them in the playoffs. The Seahawks overall were a slightly above average team, 18th best offense, 11th best defense, but being slightly above average isn't enough to make the playoffs, especially in a competitive division like the NFC West. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, B-. The Bucs joined the Packers, Chargers, and Steelers as a team that finished with 10-11 wins and lost in the wildcard round. Baker Mayfield had the best season of his career, throwing for 4,500 yards and 41 touchdowns, though he did have 16 interceptions. He led the Bucs offense to the 4th best in the league, though their defense was ranked 16th. Unfortunately for Tampa, they couldn't get it done in the playoffs, but they still had a solid season, and with how bad the NFC South is, they'll be back. Tennessee Titans, F. they finished as the worst team in the NFL. What more can I say? I quite literally have no choice but to give them an F. They brought in a bunch of players to try and fix their team, but it completely backfired. At least they have the number 1 overall pick. Gosh, you better not waste Cam Ward's career. Washington Commanders, A+. Our final team is the Commanders, the most surprising team of the season. More than the Broncos, more than the Vikings. The Commanders drafted Jaden Daniels 2nd overall, but the rest of the team wasn't anything to get excited about. They spent the offseason bringing in a bunch of mediocre players and old veterans, but somehow it all worked. Jaden Daniels had one of, if not the best rookie quarterback season of all time. All of the old veterans brought in during the offseason drastically exceeded expectations, and the Commanders managed to not only go 12-5, doubling their 6-7 win expectations, but they also won 2 playoff games over the Bucs and the 1-seed Lions to reach the NFC Championship game. Nobody expected the Commanders to even make the playoffs, let alone come within 1 game of the Super Bowl. This team had a phenomenal season and is going to be a very dangerous one for years to come. But that's it. Those are my 2024-2025 season grades. Where do you agree? Where do you disagree? Comment down below. If you enjoyed this video, then please drop a like and subscribe if you're new, and that's it for me. See ya!